I didn't think I was ever going to witness a debate as devastating as the one that you and Dana moderated back in June, where Joe Biden basically tanked his reelection campaign. I think tonight was just as devastating. I think that Kamala Harris pitched a shutout. On almost every subject I can think of. She shut Trump down on abortion. She shut Trump down on January 6th and democracy. She shut him down on national security and turned to the former president and said, the military leaders who served with you think that you're a disgrace. And then, as Dana mentioned, very powerfully at the end made the point that she is the candidate of change. We need to turn the page from a decade of division and polarization. On substance, I think she pitched a shutout, and I think she did on style as well.
Do you think Kamala won, and does that mean she may now win the election?
I think more accurately it's that Donald Trump lost. And this is not the worst debate performance I've seen in my career, but it's very close to it. The conversations about people eating dogs and cats, calling the leader of Hungary one of the greatest world leaders, repeatedly missing the opportunity to focus on inflation and affordability, and the complete inability to present his point of view without completely tearing into Joe Biden, into whomever was in his sights. It was a pretty negative performance, pretty pessimistic, cynical, contemptuous, and I think that this will cost him. Yes, I'm trying to decide if I want to go on record, and the answer is yes. I think that he loses because of this debate performance.
Wow. And here she was tonight. She was composed. She was prepared. She kept her cool. She saw advantages. She took them. She baited him successfully, which is the story of the debate, in my view. So she came out ahead in this, in my opinion.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's bonus show. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller, Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine. The Kremlin, of course, does not want you to see it, so be sure to watch it, especially since government film funds in Canada and France gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce a Russian propaganda film called Russians at War by Anastasia Trofimova that recently screened at the Venice Film Festival and the Toronto Film Festival. Trofimova's film attempts to humanize Russian soldiers carrying out a genocide against Ukrainians using the Nuremberg trial defense used by the Nazis. We were only following orders. There were, of course, massive protests at the Toronto Film Festival, which pulled the film from their program, claiming security threats against the festival. The Toronto Police Department quickly reassured the public that there are, in fact, no security threats, meaning the Toronto Film Festival blamed the protesters instead of taking responsibility for falling for a Russian propaganda whitewashing of a genocidal invasion. The award-winning Estonian filmmaker Anna Hintz, a member of the European Film Academy, released this statement. Yesterday, I was with Ukrainian community protesting against the screening of the film Russians at War. I have seen the film and can confirm that it is a propagandic piece, cleverly using cinematography to create sympathy for Mother Russia sacrificing its sons to protect the Slavic Brotherhood against Nazism, and aims for peace on Putin's terms. The film evokes empathy for the soldiers who appear completely ignorant that they are part of an army invading a sovereign nation and committing war crimes. The problem is that the film itself seems to propagate this narrative, even though the filmmaker, now in the face of protests, tries to wash herself clean publicly. While stepping on the soil of where she is going to film, we hear Trofimova say that this is either Eastern Ukraine, Russian New Territories, or the Republic of Donbass, depending on point of view. Thus, her political standpoint is clear. She does not declare that this is territory of Ukraine that is occupied by Russia since 2014. Trofimova's film also conveniently avoids any anti-Putin statements. The director has gone on record and said, if there were war crimes committed, obviously you would see them on screen. But in the 7 months that I was there, that was not my experience. Every festival or broadcaster that screens this film is supporting the cause of Putin, whether they intend to or not. So it's critical to highlight this because propaganda doesn't tell you necessarily what to believe. They muddle the truth. The whole goal of propaganda is to confuse you. And that's what this film does. The filmmaker, she narrates this propaganda. She does voiceover. And she acts so shocked in the film that Russia would invade Ukraine in 2022. But, the invasion started in 2014, which is left out in the film. And on it goes in humanizing these Russian soldiers, being so sweet, bringing food to the locals, taking care of the stray dogs, leaving out the tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of war crimes that have been documented and the hundreds of thousands of people, largely children, that have been kidnapped and forced into Russia, and God only knows what's being done to them, as well as rape of children by Russian soldiers in front of their parents, and on it goes. So this is a blatant crime of disinformation. It's masterful disinformation. The fact that it got as far as TIFF and the Venice Film Festival, I'm sorry, but there needs to be internal discussions in these highly respected international organizations. Like, you guys all have egg on your face. You fell for this. And no, this isn't, you're trying to play the victim by claiming security threats. Like, the Toronto PD had to fact check you and say, there's actually nothing happening. Like, everybody's fine and safe. And I want to also draw attention to Canada. This is pretty critical. The recent DOJ indictments exposing a Kremlin disinformation ring paying MAGA influencers included a Canadian shell company that was used to set up the propaganda operation that paid off Benny Johnson and Tim Pool and other MAGA Kremlin shills. Nearly 10 years ago, I heard from Canadian friends concerns that the Kremlin was trying to buy its way into the Canadian elite, setting up fancy dinners with Russian oligarchs. It looks like those early efforts have paid off. Related to this news, the Biden administration is set to unveil declassified U.S. intelligence findings that indicate RT, also known as Russia Today, is deeply intertwined with Russia's global intelligence operations. I've been saying that on this show since the beginning. RT, Russia Today, it's Russian military. Russia's Minister of Defense, Shoigu, gave a press conference years ago, I want to say like right after the 2016 election, announcing that Russian disinformation was going to become even more subtle. Like, disinformation, RT, all the media they create, their TV stations, all the bloggers they pay off, all the YouTubers, that's all an arm of the Russian military against democracies around the world that dare to try to hold them accountable and stop their imperialist genocidal ambitions. But this move by Biden is really interesting. It's going to come with a diplomatic initiative to share information with countries about the risks associated with RT's activities. And so that's going to basically out these guys wherever they are in the world. So if you are a Gaslit Nation listener in Australia, in the UK, in Germany, pay attention to who sounds like a paid Kremlin shill, because they likely are a paid Kremlin shill, and put pressure on your government to out them. And amplify any local reports wherever you are that we should be paying attention to. And as we've seen with the DOJ indictments and my film, Mr. Jones, Russian disinformation often involves Western collaborators. We'll continue to track this story and bring you more as it develops. Now on to the debate. The opening clips you heard were conservative commentators, including Chris Wallace, Republican pollster Frank Luntz, and Fox News host Brit Hume, all admitting Kamala Harris won the debate. And Trump not only lost, but he likely lost the election thanks to that debate. You may be wondering, well, what about the polls? Nate Silver, who was hired by prediction market Polymarket as an advisor, which includes Dark Lord Peter Thiel as an investor, claims Trump will likely win. That's what Nate Silver's pushing. Be careful of polls. Dirty fake polls from the far right have increasingly flooded the media to demoralize Democrats so they give up, don't bother door knocking or donating money. Here's longtime Democratic strategist Simon Rosenberg on what to make of the polls showing Trump in the lead.
It is vital to Donald Trump's effort, if he tries to cheat and overturn the election results, he needs to have data showing that somehow he was winning the election. And so there's also a deeply pernicious, I mean, not in addition to the, just the perniciousness of gaming polling and misleading people, because these Republican polling outfits, we don't produce this kind of polling because we use all of our money to win elections. They have somehow decided to spend millions and millions of dollars on these polls. And the question is, why would you do it if it's anything other than helping them win elections? They're not trying to inform the electorate. They're trying to win the election by gaming the polling averages. And I think this time what we have to be worried about, and the reason we have to call this out, is that Donald Trump needs to go into Election Day with some set of data showing him winning. So if he loses, he can say, we cheated.
We're in for a battle. This week's bonus episode features Michael Podhorzer, who has been fighting for our democracy for decades and was called by Time magazine as an architect of a broad coalition that worked tirelessly to protect the integrity of the 2020 election. I asked him about that because I always thought it was our Gaslit Nation community that saved America in 2020. It turns out defeating a wannabe autocrat took all of us, and now we have to do it all again. Podhorzer is the former longtime political director of the AFL-CIO, the largest federation of unions in the United States. He is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, the chair of the Analyst Institute, the Research Collaborative, and the Defend Democracy Project, and writes the Substack Weekend Reading. Here's a clip from our discussion.
And so I think, everybody now is really focused, I think in some ways too focused on what they're going to do to steal the election, right? And what I say to people is that first, remember that if we don't win the election, they don't have to steal it. And it's still the case that in those 6 states, it's going to be likely pretty close. So the most effective thing you can do is make sure we win by enough that it's too difficult to overturn.
To hear the full episode, be sure to subscribe at patreon.com/gaslit to get bonus shows, all episodes ad-free, invites to our exclusive events, join our VP debate watch party in the Victory Chat on October 1st, access our How to Make a Podcast workshop on October 24th, and more by subscribing at patreon.com/gaslit. Discounted annual memberships are available. Now, before we head into this week's discussion on how to protect our election from Donald Trump, MAGA, the Kremlin, I want to share a quick masterclass on how to stand up to a bully, courtesy of Vice President Kamala Harris, who baits Trump so perfectly. I haven't seen Trump this owned since his Helsinki press conference with Putin.
Actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
That set off 1,000 memes. Here's a clip of a new song by the artist Kifness.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
People of Springfield, please don't eat my cats. Why would you do that? Eat something else.
And then the women got in on it, creating what's sure to be a lesbian anthem.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. Eat the cat. Eat the cat. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. Eat the cat.
Unfortunately, Trump's comments put a target on Springfield, Ohio, where a bomb threat led to at least 2 schools being evacuated. It's getting harder to tell whether this was a deranged Trump supporter or a Russian op, as Russia has done this to terrorize Ukraine. Civil rights attorney Alejandra Caraballo, a clinical instructor at Harvard Law School's Cyber Law Clinic, wrote a thread on Twitter that she, as an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ rights, has received countless threats, including bomb threats, which she forwarded to the FBI, and the FBI, of course, did nothing so far as we know. Those threats, she says, are originating, from what she can tell, from Eastern Europe, possibly Russia. I'll read from her thread now, which you can find in the show notes for this week's episode. I received these threats this morning. They're signed off in Cyrillic and come from a Russian email address. It's the same person who has been doing this to LGBTQ people and schools for 2 years. It's so clear this is a foreign influence op to inflame this story and divide people even further. And that story is, of course, the pets being eaten in Springfield, Ohio. And so one thing to remember from 2016, what Trump would say, Kremlin would amplify. The bots would amplify. Kremlin State TV would amplify. And they'd pour gasoline on his hatred. They pour gasoline on his bullying and make people increasingly vulnerable. And so that's what's going on here. And it's pretty scary, and it's only going to get worse as we lead up to the election. And hopefully Kamala wins, that we all show up to not only vote, but get out the vote and Kamala wins. And then those weeks leading up to her inauguration, that's going to be another very fragile period for our democracy in the world. And the Kremlin is going to be looking for every opportunity to terrorize. This is exactly what they're doing to Ukraine. And they're doing it to America now and have been for years. Many times it's going to get worse before it gets better. So let's hold on to each other tight in these critical months ahead. If you are feeling a certain way, we're going to get through this election and reform our country for the better. What do I always say? Don't panic, do the work. Don't panic, everyone. But no, it's going to be fine. We're going to get through it. This is American history. It's always been this ugly. Donald Trump is the latest reincarnation of the white supremacy monster that founded America. And our job is to contain this demon and create enough safeguards in our democracy that when it comes back around again, we're more vigilant, we're protected. Even if, our generation is no longer here, but future generations are going to honor their history, know their history, and do the work needed when the first signs of that Trump reincarnation pops up again, as it does, especially when non-white people and women make meaningful progress in society towards equality and fairness. Now let's take a quick look at other debate highlights. Trump claimed Kamala Harris is giving transgender alien operations in prison, which set off 1,000 memes of ET in a dress. Trump then let out the battle cry of deadbeats everywhere, insisting, I have a concept of a plan. And Trump forced the world to ask, who the fuck is Abdul? It turns out that's not the name of the Taliban leader. It's just the name Trump gives to Muslims everywhere. Then Trump revived the national debate of who is actually killing pets in America. And it turns out it's the threats to our democracy. You may recall South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem gleefully bragged about shooting a puppy in the face. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, her brother lynched a dog at camp when he was 17. His father, Mike Huckabee, was the governor at the time and buried the story. Robert Kennedy Jr. has a dead animal fetish. He famously put a dead bear cub in his car and dumped it in Central Park. And he urged his friend to eat dog when visiting South Korea. So it's pretty clear which side in this election is more likely to kill your pet. I remember well from Obama versus Romney in 2012, once the story got out that Romney strapped the family dog in a crate on the hood of the car and took a long road trip, the dog panicking, shitting itself, because who in their right minds does that? Romney's terrified dog became a meme he couldn't escape, and that cost him the election, partly. I joined a team at moveon.org, and we followed Romney across the country in a car with a giant dog strapped to the roof. This is true. I actually did this. I'll link to the video in the show notes. Join us for our next debate watch party on October 1st in the Victory Chat on Patreon as we watch Tim Walz humiliate Peter Thiel lab experiment J.D. Vance. It will be the coach versus the Kremlin. Now here's Michael Podhorzer on how Trump and his goon squad are trying to steal the election and what can be done about it. quoted in Time in a 2021 now famous article about being an architect of a whole shadow network for good, which is refreshing because normally we have all these shadow networks for bad, as being part of this coalition protecting the integrity of the vote in the 2020 election. Do you have any similar campaigns in this election that you're a part of?
Yeah, well, I think the headline on that article was unfortunate because what we were really doing was engaged in a conspiracy to commit democracy, and that ought to be like the norm rather than something, cover story worthy. And much has happened, fortunately, since then, in terms of many of the holes that we spotted in the mechanical electoral process. Like now there are whole new organizations that didn't exist then that popped up to do what we were doing on the fly, right? And there's been, a greater orientation to it, right? And another thing, it's really important to realize is that many of those threats that we were dealing with, voters have removed, right? In 2020, Georgia was a Republican trifecta. Arizona was a Republican trifecta. Wisconsin was a Republican supermajority legislature and Supreme Court. Michigan was a, MAGA state legislature. Pennsylvania was a MAGA state legislature. Now, the only Republican trifecta left is Georgia, right? Because by winning elections in Arizona, we have Katie Hobbs as governor now. By winning elections in Michigan, we have a Democratic trifecta that actually repealed right to work and has done a lot of great things. In Wisconsin, we have a majority on the Supreme Court now. In Pennsylvania, we broke the state legislature. So a whole set of challenges we had to deal with. In 2020, we've done it. We've improved our position in the best way possible by electing people who aren't after our democracy, right? And so I think, everybody now is really focused, I think in some ways too focused on what they're going to do to steal the election, right? And what I say to people is that, first, remember that if we don't win the election, they don't have to steal it, right? And it's still the case that in those 6 states, it's going to be likely pretty close. So the most effective thing you can do is make sure we win by enough that it's too difficult to overturn.